A lot of people think they are expert communicators because they like to talk a lot. A good communicator, according to our guest today, values the importance of listening to listen versus listening to respond. In this episode, we're going to explore the 5 types of communicators and how you can be a better partner, a leader, or an interviewer through using your most undervalued tool, listening. This is the Truth Be Told podcast, where we unlock the secrets of strategic communication. A former business and life coach to top advisors, Matt Halloran has helped over 5,000 advisors understand how to create trust and build rapport with prospects they haven't even met yet. He has studied the way that people communicate for over 2 decades, has been featured in the Wall Street Journal as a digital communication expert, and wrote the Social Media Handbook for Financial Advisors. He has now combined his extensive knowledge and expertise in business and coaching with one of his passions, podcasting. Matt has hosted and been on over 1,000 podcasts. He's also the host of Proudmouth's podcast, the Top Advisor Marketing Podcast, where he shares marketing strategies tailored for advisors and connects with top industry leaders. Matt recently published his book, Shut the F Up and Listen, which is a perfect transition into our episode. Let's hear directly from our guest, Matt Halloran. Welcome to the Truth Be Told podcast. I am your host, Dave Thompson. I am here with Matt Halloran, and for those of you that are just listening, just a reminder, you can also watch this podcast on video. We've got it on YouTube and Spotify video. And I say that because I only have Matt on as my guest because I'm jealous of his beard. And I don't know, Matt, if you've realized, I wore a shirt for you today.
That's absolutely fantastic. Listen, brother, you have a beautiful head of hair, though. I'm entirely jealous of what you got on top. I got nothing there. I can only grow it here, so I do.
Well, I'm excited for our conversation. I want to go through your book here in a little bit, which is a fascinating read. And what I think is interesting is our whole theme of the podcast, as you know, is on communication, and everything that you put out, whether it's on LinkedIn and your book and your podcast that you're on, is about how listening might be the most important part of communication. So I'm just going to kind of kick off with that. Well, why do you feel like listening has been maybe such an undervalued kind of skill that people have?
Well, I think it's because people think that they hear all the time. That doesn't mean that they're listening, right? And I think that's the big thing. You know, I opened the book with my grandmother saying, Matt, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should speak, half as much as you talk. I'm sorry, you should listen twice as much as you speak. And dude, that's really what ends up happening. The big issue here is most people are listening to respond. They don't listen to listen. They don't listen to just absolutely feel, understand, grasp, internalize what people are saying. They're just so quick to react. And in fact, and I know because I've been, I did my due diligence on the show, a lot of times how quickly somebody reacts to something that you're saying is actually a tell, right? How uncomfortable they might be, or if they're really guilty or not, how defensive they are. If you are able to be comfortable sitting in silence, Dave, everything can change.
Yeah, silence is so powerful. You're right. We talk about that so many times, whether we've had investigators as guests on the podcast, attorneys, and then just, communication experts overall. And it seems like so much happens in a moment where nothing is happening in communication.
Yeah.
In the book, and I'll put it up here in case if people are watching, just because the cover is kind of fun too, but the title's the best to me. It's Shut the F Up and Listen. So a couple questions. First of all, did you have to argue with the publisher whether or not you were going to spell out whatever word you wanted to put on the cover?
So I self-published this, I built my own team. But I did meet with an Amazon consultant and they expressly said that I can't.
Yes.
Well, Amazon won't allow you to promote the book. I found out that was actually about 50% true, but, yeah, the whole idea is, and this is going to sound really dorky, but, I want people to read the book because there's good stuff in the book, but if you just look at the cover and realize, oh my God, I should just shut up more, we win. We all win, right? The world wins actually, in pretty much every situation, whether you're in sales or you're a leader of a company or whether you're in a relationship or you're working with your kids. Like silence, being quiet, actually learning how to shut the F up and listen is a freaking game changer, man. And I've got stories upon stories in the book about the times that I learned about listening. I've been married for 25 plus years. It is the cornerstone of my marriage, because a lot of times, and I'm sure you know this, my wife doesn't want me to solve her problems. She actually just wants me to be present and be there with her while she is processing things. So many times we're just so quick to want to give an answer when that might not be what the other person wants.
Yeah, you just hit a few things there I wanted to explore. First, kind of funny that you said, I mean, you want people to read the book. I wanted to read a book because I like it, but the cover and the title, I don't know if you know this, but this is a good prop. We had our company meeting a few weeks ago, and I'm sure some of them are listening. And I just took this book out of my backpack during the middle of one of the sessions and threw it on somebody's desks just so I had a glance at the title for a little, all right, pause. But the other thing you said, I would recommend, yeah, it is really important in relationships and whether it's personal or professional. But you're not going to tell somebody, hey, shut the F up and listen. How do you manage that? How do you manage when you're being self-aware, but the person you're engaging with might be struggling with that same concept?
So there's a principle called entrainment, which actually was studied very heavily in music theory for therapeutic music. And so what entrainment means is that most people want to be in sync with the other person. And so if you are able to really sit in silence, especially for extended periods of time, that usually is a very, very good signal to the other person that, they've been talking for a while. In fact, it just happened on a sales call yesterday. This very, very successful financial advisor was joking with me, and we were talking about the products and services that we sell. And he said, when is the last time you talked? And I was like, I don't know. I don't really pay attention to that. I'm paying attention to what you're saying because I'm trying to find out if what we offer is actually a solution, for what you need. And he's like, so you really like buy into this whole, I was like, I wrote a book on it, dude. Of course I buy into it. So entrainment is a really, really powerful thing. I really like that. I think that that's a very underused skill. And that's why engaged listening, which is what I teach in the book, not active listening, is all about intention. And when you go into a conversation with specific intent, you actually can maneuver through that conversation, that interaction, much more smoothly because you actually have focus where the other person generally does not. In my experience, my background as a therapist, I mean, I used to do this all the time especially with adults with severe and persistent mental illness. You had to go in with some very, very specific intention because their reality is fundamentally different than yours, and you have to try to figure out how to meet them somewhere in the middle so that you can make therapeutic progress.
Yeah, I think that's great. I want to dive into your background here in a second. And, our listeners are really widespread in their career and their, kind of job tasks that they have. We've got a lot of investigators. So, they're responsible for trying to obtain information that most people don't want to share, whether it's embarrassing or incriminating. We also have a lot of, career professionals that are just supervisors and colleagues and have bosses. And we have a lot of people that are also in sales that work for different corporations that are selling their product. And if you don't fit any of those roles and you're listening, but you interact with any other human being, this is directly applicable to you. But what I think is so fascinating is all this information we're going through comes from a lot of diverse experience you have. And you just kind of alluded to a little bit of it, but maybe give us kind of the high level of how you got to where you're at now and what you're doing at Proudmouth.
Well, I realized the power of listening at the age of 18, actually, when I was in the Navy during the first Gulf War, and the story's in the book. I happened to cross a person who was standing a watch with a loaded gun. And I basically just walked around with him. We had compatible watches. Sometimes you were doing very similar things on the ship. And so I walked around with him for 3.5 hours, and dude, I didn't say anything. And I noted, I just felt something. I was like, there's something there. And then I actually, my undergraduate degree is in applied ethics. And so I went and did biomedical ethics training and interaction at a Allegiant Health Hospital System in Omaha, Nebraska. There's a couple of stories in the books about that. That right there was really the biggest game changer, because that was when I first realized, one, that being a philosophy major had practical applications. And two, most people don't want you to make decisions for them. They really just want to be able to process it. And so in that environment, we would walk people through structured problem-solving techniques. for difficult things too, Dave, like end of life issues, right? Treatment issues, continuing care issues. And then my wife and I worked at a place called Boys Town, which is where we lived with at-risk teenage boys. There's girls there too, but we lived with the boys. And that, of course, was all about letting these kids realize that an adult was paying any attention to them at all, because that wasn't their reality up until that point. I became a therapist, and I worked with adults with severe and persistent mental illness, and schizophrenia was my what I wrote my master's thesis on. The reduction of auditory hallucinations with systematic stimulation of the Broca area. I'm sorry, that was really nerdy. I didn't need to say that, but anyway. And then I ended up falling into financial services, because here's the deal. I found out very quickly that I have a hard time letting things go when it comes to emotional baggage. So as a therapist, when I did biomedical ethics, I internalized that stuff very, very hard, because I think that's actually part of my superpower on this earth, but I had to learn how to shed it. And so I used to drive home from my therapy office. I just cried the whole way home, every day, 5 days a week, because I couldn't go home, right? I had twin, they're probably 6 years old at the time, my wife. I wasn't going to dump all of this stuff on them. Then I got into financial services coaching and consulting, really, really happenstance. It was not, that was not really planned. And I've been there since 2006. Just because I believe in the world of marketing, I run a marketing company, that you have to find a niche, right? And so do we still help other people outside of financial services? We do. But if you're going to spend all of your marketing dollars, you want to spend it into a very specific group of people, because then you can get their attention. And we've done pretty well at Proudmouth. I mean, we've done over 10,000 episodes and over 150,000 social media posts. And I'm literally a podcaster. That's what I do. I either talk about podcasting or I'm on a podcast 5 days a week. And one other quick thing, I was 13 years old and my high school had a radio station, and it was WKDS. And I was Madman Matt Halloran. And I remember getting off my first radio show, and I put the headphones down. I ran into my advisor's office. I was like, Mr. Patrick, I know what I want to be when I grow up. And she goes, dear God, I hope it's not a DJ. I was like, oh, but unfortunately she passed away a number of years ago, but I wish I could have said, look, I'm doing it. I'm finally behind the microphone all the time. So that's just a little bit of my history. And then the book, what ended up happening was just different triggering events, right? So this person would say one thing, this person would say another thing. And I literally woke up at like 2:30 in the morning, and the book just started coming out. Grabbed my computer. I'm like, feverishly typing as quickly as possible. And then my editor, Derek Pollard, really helped the words come alive. He's a PhD creative writing professor. And then the cover is done by a muralist here in town that we've known since, he was probably 21. Look at all the yellow stickies, dude. That makes me so happy. You have yellow stickies in your book.
Proof. I wish I would have. I remember reading the part about the DJ thing, and I should have thought about that when I introduced you. I should have introduced you as Matt Halloran.
That's never going away, brother.
Power of editing. We'll see what we can do. Well, I think there's so much in your background there, and there's a few things I wanted to explore. One of which is the end of life therapy, and you wrote an example in the book that working with some doctors and nurses and trying to explain maybe empathy. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but what I want to kind of learn from you is I feel like people sometimes have maybe the curse of knowledge. We talked about this on another episode with the guest, Lisa Mitchell, where you have this information, maybe from a therapist standpoint, you're kind of looking at somebody like, hey, I know how to help you or to fix you, or you're a doctor, I know what you need. But that's not necessarily what people need to hear. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah. I think learning engaged listening is a lesson in humility. And I am never the smartest person in the room. And that's not self-deprecating humor. That's literally IQ numbers. Right. My EQ is off the charts, right? But from a, raw information, I'm not the brightest guy in the world. And I'm okay with that, because I know that that's not where my superpower is. So my wife and I, because she is always the smartest person, her IQ's off the charts. So I used to talk to her about that. It's like, well, what is that like, And she's like, well, it's really, really frustrating, because I'm usually 5 or 6 steps ahead of where everybody else in the room is. And I was like, man, that's got to be maddening. But the example that you're talking about, there's two there. There's, what I ended up having to do with a sister whose brother had gotten into a really bad car accident. But the doctors who started yelling at my partner and I during an ethics training session where we do lunch and learns with surgeons and doctors at the different hospitals. And so we had PowerPoint and all of that stuff, and we'd be up there talking. And I didn't do a lot of talking. My partner, who was the head of the program, he did the majority of the talking. And this doctor just blew his gasket. We were talking about the case study. We always did case studies. Was with a person who was basically terminal cancer patient. They and I'm air quoting there, gave him about 3 months, which by the way is very rarely right. 3 months to live, and he decided that he didn't want heroic treatment because most heroic treatment is really uncomfortable, Dave. I mean, it's invasive. Your quality of life is pretty much done. And the doctor was just yelling at us about how we're so stupid and the patient was so stupid. And he was saying the quiet part out loud, dude. Like all of the other doctors were like, oh God, he just said that. Like, I'm thinking that, but this dude's yelling it. And that's this whole principle of listening to learn, which I think is important. I think a lot of times you have to understand that listening to what else is going on around you is one of the greatest learning experiences you can have, especially when people misbehave, because that makes you put a mirror up to yourself and say, am I like that? The problem is most people don't actually hold a mirror up to themselves because they think everything has to do external locus of control. Everything is being done to me instead of how am I playing a part into what's being done. But I think that a lot of people who are unbelievably intelligent really need to learn how to listen, because I believe, and I'm not quoting research or anything like that nobody really learns anything new by talking.
I think I know that that's a direct correlation to investigators listening, right? You earlier said that you got to go into a conversation with intent, right? What's the goal or the objective? From an investigative standpoint, one of the issues is sometimes people go in with too narrow of an intent of, I want to prove that Matt's guilty, or I want to make sure that my evidence contradicts what this person's about to say. And in those interviews, to what you just said, you see the interviewer doing all the talking, and you watch a video of the interrogation or whatever, and you think, well, what the hell is the point of this conversation if you're just giving all the information in the first place? But I think that's a direct correlation to that, and to the intent piece is changing the intent of, I need this one goal of confession versus how do I get as much information out of somebody as possible? How do I learn?
So we talked about this when we were getting to know each other before we recorded, but pace, pentameter, volume, and inflection, because you've actually had people on the show talking about those things. You can't listen for those things when you're talking, man, right? So you got to get the other person talking. And we also know that uncomfortable silence, generally people fill that uncomfortable silence. Now, you might have somebody who has oppositional defiant disorder, or who's never going to follow, which in investigations that happens often, right? People who are on that end of the spectrum, but that's very, very small percentage of society. Most people hate silence. And what I think is funny, watching shows and, movies, because I'm a huge movie guy, is, they're sitting in one of those rooms, with the two-way mirror and all of the stuff. And it's always the investigator, trying to pry something out of the person who they're interrogating. And dude, I mean, honestly, because I've done this before for other reasons, but I will literally just sit down with somebody. I don't say anything at all. I just wait because I'm really comfortable with silence, brother. I love it. I crave it. If you give me silence, I take it. And so, and then usually what happens is then they just begin. Like, what do you want? Okay, there it is. There's the opening. That's what I needed, right? All of a sudden, there's permission there for me then to ask follow-up questions. But if I don't get that position, I'm not going to wring it out to anybody. And is that actually like the whole business model that you guys have in your organization? I mean, trying not to be so wildly aggressive and trying to make it so that, people are forthcoming with the information instead of you literally wringing it out of them.
Right. And that applies again to anybody, right? I don't care what your job role is. I mean, investigation, definitely. Even in investigations, if you're talking to a victim of an incident, a witness, and it could be in a workplace, right? Somebody's been discriminated against or sexually harassed or saw workplace violence. But this concept of especially people who've been exposed to trauma is they need the space and time even to attempt to accurately recall or tell a story. When you said listen to learn, there's a few things. There was one statement in your book, or the way that at least I interpreted this, that I thought was great. We struggle with a lot of people that feel like you can tell when somebody's lying to you based off of their physical or verbal behavior. And you may have seen some of our guests talk about this, and the science just debunks that. But the way I like that you wrote about it is when you hear or feel the pace change, the volume change, whatever it might be, is you're not classifying that as a deceptive behavior. It's telling you, I need to listen more. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, dude. Well, you just said that unbelievably well. In fact, I probably should have put that phrase in the book specifically. Those are just cues that something else is going on, right? That's when they get louder, when they get quieter, when they speed up, when they slow down, when they're paced, they're, the independent, the bump, a bump, a bump, a bump, and it just, skips a beat. Something's there. And you have to then focus your listening on that specifically. And in fact, I didn't, maybe I did have this in the book. I was interviewing this really he costs like $100,000 a month PR guy. He can get you anywhere, right. Wherever you want to go. He's got the connections. But he's autistic, and he's been able to use his autism as a massive superpower. His ability to focus and memorize things is unbelievable. But he came on our show and he kept saying the same tagline, like kind of hook statement, over and over again. Now this happens, right? With people with autism, sometimes they can kind of get into a loop. And then it was probably, he did about 4 times. It wasn't like totally excessive. He did about 4 times. And then that 4th time, I noticed that he had paused briefly between one of the 2 words that I knew were very important words in what he was trying to get across to my audience. And I interrupted him. Pattern interruption's really powerful, by the way. And it's interesting because you think that goes against listening, but sometimes it doesn't. But pattern interruption, and I went ahead and I was like, whoa, hold on. And he was kind of startled. And I said, that was different, dude. You said that differently that time. Why did you say that differently? And he sits back and has this like Cheshire cat grin on his face. And he goes, so you're actually listening. I was like, yeah, dude, I've been trying to figure out what the hell you've been talking about for 5 minutes now. And finally, I just realized that there's something else there. And here's the thing, open-ended question. I didn't know what it was, Dave. I didn't know, but he did. So I was like, okay, you need to dive more deeply into that. I didn't describe what that was. He knew what that was. And dude, the conversation went beautifully after that. In fact, I edited out a whole bunch of the other stuff in post-production, but you have to be able to hyper-focus your listening. In fact, if you don't mind, I want to give everybody, so we're about, 20 minutes in or whatever. I want to give everybody an exercise that they can do as soon as they get done listening to this episode. And this is one of my favorite exercises in the world, which highlights how you practice that skill that we just talked about with pace, metabolism, volume, inflection. So what you're going to do is you're going to go out to your favorite restaurant, right? Or coffee shop or wherever you'd like to hang out with your friend. Because it can be your business partner, your wife, your buddy, whatever, it doesn't matter. And you're going to sit on the same side of the table. Okay, so this is weird because that's not what most of you guys do.
People are already getting uncomfortable.
Yeah. So good, really uncomfortable. And so you're going to be sitting next to the person. And you're both going to have pieces of paper. And what you're going to do is you guys are going to agree on listening in, not weird like you're staring at them, listening in on one conversation that is happening within the environment that you're in. Okay, so you agree on that. Then what you're going to do is you're not going to stare at them. You're not going to stare at them because that's creepy and I don't want anybody to be creepy. What you're going to do is this. You're going to answer 3 questions. What is the nature of the relationship? What God's name are they talking about? And what do you think the desired outcome is for each of them? You're only going to do it for about 10 minutes. So this is not excessive, right? So you're going to do it for about 10 minutes. And then you actually literally set a timer on your watch or phone or whatever. And then you discuss. What this does, Dave, is so much fun because first off, you have to learn how to just get all of the other noise out of your brain. because you're going to hyper focus that listening, and you're going to be listening for pace, pentameter, volume, inflection. You're going to be listening to pauses, watching them lean in, watching them, lean back, crossing their arms, all the stuff that's been debunked. But those are the sorts of things that you're going to go ahead and write down, and you're going to compare. Now, my favorite way to do this is with the opposite sex, okay? Because as a man, the way I have been raised to listen, which we have never been trained to listen, to be abundantly clear, is so fundamentally different than how my wife was trained to listen, that comparing notes is one of the best learning experiences both of you guys will be able to have. And I think it's so much fun. I've done it with my kids. I've done it with my wife. I've done it with friends. I do it at conferences because I speak at a lot of conferences. I just absolutely love doing it because, well, it's practice. And getting back to one of your initial questions, this is a skill. Much like everything else that you've talked about on the show and what you guys do for a living, this is a skill that you have to practice, right? And if you want to master listening, you don't just hear, you actually really, truly learn how to listen.
What you just said, what is really cool in the book is there's so many self-help type books out there, communication books. Yours, you take it like you just did every chapter and you give a practical exercise. You give a way to make this kind of a living, breathing thing. And that one, I mean, you just took people watching to another level. People listening is what you took it to. But that's really neat idea, because I'm thinking even, there's a lot of people that listen. I know that travel a lot, probably listening to us right now as they're traveling. And so you end up at a restaurant or a bar by yourself. So you don't have that other person to compare notes with, but the amount of times you're listening to conversations and you can kind of predict where this is going to go. I had a unique experience. It'll be kind of fun to do together at some point, but I was listening. I got addicted to the TikTok, and I'm scrolling and I'm watching people. And now I'm seeing that there's like speed dating. I made this mistake of watching one for like 30 seconds. So it's all I'm seeing.
Yep.
But man, what a observation of just social interaction and how people can't listen, can't carry on a conversation. And one of the things that I see a lot, and I'm going to go to your types of communicators here in a second, but people that are so overly scripted in their conversations. Mm-hmm. And you can tell that, back to your concept of intent, they're so focused on what they want to hear that they've got a list of the same 5 questions they're going to ask everybody. And it's like asking the question, what's your favorite food? And somebody say, I like Italian. And the follow-up is, well, what's the best Mexican restaurant to go to? Well, you're not connecting the dots. And you see that so much in these conversations. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I'm going to go back to this point of different types of communicators. I feel like you and I are kind of snorkeling right now. I don't know if that's an accurate description. Okay. Yep. So you start off your book listing these types of communicators. So first, kind of where did that concept come from, and how did you identify what labels you were going to use?
I just was trying to give people a quick hack, man, because, especially if you're a snorkeler or if you are a scuba diver, that's your default, right? And if you're a scuba diver trying to talk to, a parachuter, it's just not going to go well. And so I just wanted it to be fun, right? That was the goal. So parachuters are those people who you get in a conversation, you ask the question, how are you doing? And then they say, fine. And they say, how are you? And if you don't say fine, bam, they pull that ripcord and they're gone, right? They're like, screw this, I'm out. I'm not going to deal with this. I love hang gliders, though. I was actually having a conversation with a marketing friend of mine, and she had messaged me after she read the book, and she's like, Matt, I'm really a hang glider. And I was like, yeah, Nick, you're totally a hang glider. And she's like, well, how did you know that? I said, because what you're doing is you're checking, right? So a hang glider comes into conversation and they just kind of feel you out, right? And then if they want to, if the feeling was right, if their intuition was correct, they come back around. And then generally you're going to start meeting them generally in the snorkeler level, right? The next one is water skiing. This is where almost everybody in the world is, because most people, Dave, are just holding on for dear life in conversation. They're trying to find an exit because they know that if they don't exit correctly, it's going to hurt, right? Because I don't know. So I live in Michigan, like everybody freaking water skis here, right? And so, you're getting yanked behind the boat, you're on you're on your skis and you're having fun, you're on your kneeboard or whatever. Man, if you catch an edge, it hurts. You fall and it hurts. Water hurts, right? That's how I think most people think exiting or even entering conversation can be. It can be painful. But then after you fall, right, and you hopefully wearing a life vest, right, then you're just kind of bobbing in the water and you just realize, hey, that wasn't that bad. I'm okay with this. And a lot of times the tow rope comes around again. What do? Grab the tow rope and you're ready to go get yanked behind the boat. Snorkelers are really what I actually teach podcasters too, because snorkeling is really the best flow of conversation. Snorkelers are people who want to go right up next to each other, like you and I are doing, right? We're right up next to each other. I'm listening to you. You're listening to me. We're looking at the world, trying to look at the world in the same way. And then what ends up happening is one of us wants to go a little bit more deeply. So we take a breath and then we're going to both dive together. Most people can hold their breath for about 2 minutes. Now, really good people can hold their breath for longer. Like I can hold my breath generally for about 3 minutes. I've never been able to do more than 3. Part of that is I was a tubist. And so like playing the tuba, you have to have huge lungs. Anyway, but then what happens is when your lungs start burning, when you start getting that discomfort in conversation, you come up together. And so as a podcaster, that's the flow of conversation. And there's a couple of times, because I've been paying attention to this today, there's been a couple of times where I will speak for more than 3 minutes at a time, but very rarely do I ever say anything for more than 3 minutes. Because one, I want your audience to be able to come up for air to hopefully process what I just said. And I also don't want this to be a monologue. I want it to be a conversation. So when you're going into this sort of media, interviewing anybody, having a guest, that snorkeler is the right way to do it. Now, finally, the scuba divers. There aren't a lot of scuba divers out there, man. And these are people who start deep. How are you doing today? Well, I have bipolar disorder. Oh, okay. All right. Here we go, dude. And there are some times where you have the energy to have that conversation. Sometimes you're going to yank that ripcord and be a parachute.
So I love it. I love the way the kind of the analogies, the metaphors you put throughout the book too. It makes it's easy to digest and hopefully easy for people to relate to what they've seen in a conversation. When I was reading through it, I was thinking a couple of things. I want to see what you think about this. One, I feel like I'm a different one of those categories depending on the situation and
Yes.
the person I'm interacting with.
That is correct.
And then the second part is how do you manage? You talk a little bit about this in the book, but how do you manage when maybe I'm in a mood of parachuting? Maybe I got other stuff going on, right? So I'm saying, how are you? But maybe I don't really care at the moment. I mean, I care, but I'm not going to get into it. But then I'm talking to a scuba diver who wants to tell me about all their life's problems that day. So how do you, I guess the first piece is it situational? And then how do you kind of manage interacting with a different dynamic?
It is entirely situational, or at least it should be. When I first met my wife, who's this unbelievably attractive, brilliant woman, I said to her, I was like, why are you going to marry me? Like, I'm not very good looking. I'm not very successful. I don't have any money. And she's a biologist, right? And she said, it's not the strongest that survive. It's the most adaptable. And she said, you are one of the most adaptable people I've ever met in my life. And yes, some people don't like that. Some people say that, well, you're just fake. You're not really. No, I know how to get into conversations at those different levels, but it's in my control. And I think, Dave, that's really what's important is if you are in the parachuting mood and you run into a deep sea diver, just pull the cord, say, hey, and this is one of my favorite things. Listen, I appreciate you telling me that right now. I don't really have the energy to go that deep right now. But I'd love to talk to you later when I do. It's just a nice, graceful way to ask it. Now, I'm not saying, you're too much. I'm not saying you're a jerk. I'm not saying I hate you or I can't deal with you. So I don't have that energy to be able to put into it now. But I also think that the reason why I wanted to create the hack was so that you can very quickly figure out who you're talking to. Because the goal is to get everybody to snorkel, right? Because when you listen, not listen to respond, it is pulling up next to somebody and diving together, right? And you're going to feel it. There's a flow to that conversation. And that's what I think people should really strive for. So I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, definitely. And the first part you said of, if you just don't have the headspace to do that, I think, again, for investigators listening, is be open to the opposite of that, especially with victims and witnesses. And, we've talked a lot about trauma-informed interviewing on some of our episodes. And again, even if not an interviewer, but you're talking to somebody who's maybe experienced a traumatic event or an emotional event, and you want to be their friend or their therapist or their investigator and figure out what happened, they may not be ready to tell you. And so allowing them to pull the parachute and coming to revisit is important. But I'm wondering, in your experience, especially the end of life conversations, time is also important. So you can't always say now's not the right time. How do you balance that of, hey, we need urgency to talk about this, but I also want to give you space to think about it?
I think everybody's trained so wrong. See, you just opened a huge can of worms, brother. So
Perfect.
I'm going to totally walk into this. This is why active listening, I think, is just empty, fake listening. It's the okay, because you're not listening. You're trying to show the other person that you're listening. I also think that a lot of us are trained in, again, the pattern interruption or interrupting the emotion because it makes us uncomfortable when we need to allow that other person to go through it. There have been lots and lots and lots of studies that if you let somebody start crying, it doesn't last that long. And if you are there just being present while that's happening, there is a totally different emotional dynamic from there. Because what most people are going to do is they're going to try to stop them from crying, patting them on the back. It's going to be okay. No, it's not. My husband just got murdered, right? Or sliding them Kleenex across the table. No, that's pattern interruption. You're not letting them feel that emotion. And if you, Dave, are allowing people to feel that emotion, the relationship is fundamentally changed. You are going to get anything that you need out of that person because nobody does that. Everybody is just so quick to, oh my God, they're crying. What do I do? I'm just using crying. Maybe it's angry. Hey, calm down. No, don't tell me to calm down. You know that they say this stuff, dude. Don't tell me to calm down. Okay, I just ruined the relationship right there. Their anger, this is where silence comes in. You become a Zen Buddhist freaking monk, a Catholic monk, whatever monk you want to be, a nun, I don't care. You learn how to sit in that silence. You let them go through that rant, listening, because if you listen to pace, pentameter, volume, inflection, you're going to start noticing in their rant what actually you need to do follow-ups on. And you just sit there. One of my favorite things to do is, as a therapist, you write, right? Because you're not supposed to type because it's distracting. And in fact, your brain processes that differently than writing. And so if I was an investigator going through that situation with somebody who's really, really off, right? Whether they're crying uncontrollably or whether they're angry, whether they're, happier than they should be in a situation or whatever on a whole range of emotions. I will, and I only write a couple of words. And the only reason why I write down a couple of words is, one, because I want them to feel like I'm listening, but I don't want to write so much so that if they grabbed the piece of paper, they would know what I was paying attention to. And dude, this is the snorkel again, dude. I'm going to pull up right next to you. Snorkeling doesn't have to be a beautiful conversation of depth and talking about how beautiful the fishes and the coral are. I can pull up next to you where you're pissed, where you're sad, where you're angry, where you're shocked, where your whole world just came into an end. That is what listening is. And I believe, and this is going to sound really corny, but again, that's just part of who I am, dude. Listening is showing people you love them. And I also firmly believe that if you can hate somebody for no apparent reason, you can love somebody for no apparent reason. And I don't think a lot of investigators go into environments like that.
It's what's the intent again, right? If the environment they're going into, which is tough because an investigator, especially our law enforcement partners, the caseload they might have, the urgency to get information, but at the end of the day, you're still talking to another human. And understanding that these same principles apply to create a comfortable space to allow people to communicate. And talking about space, and you mentioned this a couple of times, but one of the kind of the keys to listening, and again, I like the way the book is broke down, is you have the listening to learn, you have listening to hold space. What does that mean?
So listening to hold space is giving somebody the opportunity to process what just happened. And so the story that I illustrate in there, it's kind of blended between listening to build trust and listening to hold space, because I really think they're both almost exactly the same. But I wanted 7 chapters, so whatever, anyway, it's good marketing. And so when it comes to, listening to hold space, your entire intention is for them to feel heard. Now, again, I'm not trying to use cryptic language here. It's, as a man, I would talk to my wife and I would say, hey, you did slumber parties when you were a kid, right? Of course, everybody does slumber parties. She's like, well, what did you guys do in slumber parties? Like, oh, why don't we beat each other up and wrestled and, ate pizza and watched stupid stuff on TV? And I said, well, what did you do? And she said, well, we used to just sit around and listen to each other. Right. And so they weren't listening to solve their problems. They were just listening to be present, to show that they're supportive. And I think that's really what holding space is all about. If you just go into these conversations, asking an opening question. So let's say you are interrogating somebody, and you know, I'm assuming that there are scripts upon scripts, because every profession has them. But you know, I don't know how often your investigators just go in and sit down and say, what happened? And then shut the F up and listen, right? Because if you just hold that space, people are inclined to fill that space. I have to go back to something, because I realized I missed a small piece when I was talking about halting people's emotions, is if you let them experience the full peak of the emotion, the wave of the emotion, it actually crests quickly, right? And we know that it's really about 3 minutes. So if somebody's really, really, really angry, if you let them be really angry, they'll be angry for about 3 minutes. Listen, dude, you got 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. Because if I can get you past that anger, and then I can start asking you some legitimate questions, or I'm listening to you during that 3 minutes, everything can change. But again, all of this has to do with space. This is actually the book is part of a 3-part book series. So this is Shut the F Up and Listen. The second one is actually called Hope, which is help one person every day. And then the last one is actually on silence, and how vital silence is in any aspect of your life. But it all has to do with humility, and it has to do with being comfortable, because, dude, we want to fill that silence, and I want you not to.
I love that. You know, the silence book, you should just make 100 pages that are blank.
I talked to my friend Derek, the guy who helped me with this. He wanted to, we were talking about putting one word on every page, you know, and in fact, if you look at how Shut the F Up and Listen was laid out by Weirder Wonderland is the company that helped me with this, we built space into the book.
Yeah, and it's actually, and it's neat that it's intentional. The space allows you to just take a second and really digest what you just said. It breaks up the stories really well, and the actionable kind of strategies really well. So it's really, it makes it easy to read, but also impactful. So I noticed that as I went through it. The 3-minute thing that you just said, what kind of struck me in the investigative space, there's a lot of outdated, I would say, strategies that people are using that are known to be confrontational. And so it's not, hey, can you tell me what happened? It's, I know what happened, you did it, now tell me. And so what I would anticipate from what you just said is, you know, sometimes people come into an interview or a conversation, they're resistant, they're emotional, they're upset, they're frustrated, whatever. You allow them to have that space. You allow them to come to that crest, as you just mentioned. What we've seen in these kind of outdated techniques is, I feel like we prolong it because we're forcing it. So it's, I know you're upset, but just calm down. I got to talk to you or whatever. And now that's going to just stretch out the resistance level.
It's, and I know that it has been researched. I can't pull from that research, but anytime you're trying to hold, it's like, if you've ever been to the ocean. So I love these videos of people who go to the ocean for the first time, and they're like, I'm going to go out into the surf, and a wave just comes to you. It's like a 3-footer, and they wham, right? There's, you know, what the hell happened? Yeah, dude, that's the ocean. Same thing with emotions, right? Now, if you learn, like I learned how to surf, how do you manage those waves, right? So that you can get out past the break point so you can catch the right wave. The communication is no different, right? If first off, you're never going to beat that, right? But if I just let that anger wash over me, not internalize it, but if I let that anger wash over me as the investigator or the interrogator or whatever, right? First off, that is so fundamentally different than how any of these other interactions are. I firmly believe that you are going to get to the bottom of what you need to get to, or at least more information in order for you to continue your investigation.
Yeah. And job interviewers too. You know, we've had some HR professionals on the call, and every time I think about silence, like, yeah, investigations, but I think more about the job interview questions of, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker and how you handled it. And you see an interviewer ask the question, the person responds, and the interviewer is immediately writing their response down, which signals to me, all right, I hit whatever you needed, versus, and our first episode was with Dave Zalowski, the founder of Wicklander Zalowski, and he talked about the most important and easiest question to ask is, tell me more about that. And you allow silence.
Yep.
And you allow the space.
So tell me more. Tell me more about that. Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay. Not questions, affirmations. Okay.
Affirmations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pulling right next to you as a snorkeler, dude. Right? I'm just okay. Wow. Okay. Hey, tell me more about that. Could you expand? Right. So tell me more is one of the greatest things because it is not a binary question. It is not no. Tell me more. What do you mean no? I just want you to tell me more. Right. And especially I love tell me more about that, as we talked earlier in the show. That to me as the investigator or the person who's asking the questions, and that from the person I'm talking to could be two totally different things, dude. I need to know what their that is. And
Right.
then I can start making some progress because their that could be light years away from where the hell I am. I do a lot of sales. So I do all of the sales for my company. And they sell themselves. Right. I mean, really, they're coming in. And so any sort of, now there are objections. And do I ask for the business? Yes. But 90% of the conversation is by me using redirection, rephrasing, and reframing, just going ahead and navigating the conversation to go ahead and again, see if we're the right fit. It's really, really powerful. And then when I'm joking at the end, because, there's a finite part to the call, and I'll say, hey, look, I just want you to know I am a really good salesperson. I'm going to follow up with you because I really would like to have an answer to see if you're going to go ahead and join Proudmouth specifically, right? It's the same sort of thing in all interactions, right? Listening is the key that makes everything go more smoothly. Everything. None of this, what can I do to get you in this car today? Let me go get my manager, or, oh, hey, you should talk to HR for that. I'm going to go get the CEO. This good cop, bad cop crap that's always played on television, all of that stuff. It's all a load of hooey. If you just know how to sit comfortably in silence, create that space, the people that you're talking to are going to give you the answers you're looking for.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I know they got you here for a few more minutes, and I've got so many more questions to ask you. But this tell me more. I'm going back to your exercise that you assigned people to do, and if you forgot, you better rewind and go back and go do this. But I think a lot of people out there struggle with, how do I develop rapport? How do I maintain a conversation with somebody I don't know? And to me, that is the easiest ways. When I'm eavesdropping, or I'm going to say I'm learning, listening to learn is what I'm going to say instead of eavesdropping. But when I'm listening to other people have a conversation at the bar, and you got some guy trying to hit on the bartender or whatever it might be, listen maybe, and instead of trying to figure out that specific pointed question, tell me more is the easiest way to keep a conversation going. Just so simple. One of the last things I wanted to ask you is just to kind of touch on, I don't know if you've thought about this or looked into it, but the modernization of all of this in the digital world. We've got so many people that their conversations are now on FaceTime,
Yep.
on Zoom, on Teams, or there's no video. And it's this terrible world of social media responses where people aren't taking a break at all to digest. They're just responding right away. But are you seeing any of this translate to the same kind of communication in a digital world?
I am wholeheartedly. In fact, I've been experimenting with this with my own TikTok channel. And so I have created a couple of rather pointed videos that are challenging some social norms. And one of them has like 500 comments. And one of the things that I consistently write is, I hear what you're saying, period. And the most fascinating thing about it is they almost always come back and say, thank you, or they heart it, or they thumbs. I mean, dude, it's applicable in the digital space. In this is just the world we live in now. You have to be able to show your audience, or the world is our audience nowadays, that you can also listen. I shoot, 1 minute monologue videos that are meant to engage the people who are following me on social. And the best way for me to go ahead and show that I'm practicing what I preach is that I just say, I hear you. And man, that's very different than a thumbs up or a heart or a, emoji. It's, I type out, I hear you. And again, this all goes back to the intentionality of listening, right? There are people, man, one of them, this person went off on me. I mean, it was brutal, and I just said, hey, I don't agree with you, but I want you to know I heard everything that you said. And they didn't keep coming at me. They could have, right? Because boy, I opened a can of worms on that video. But they could have. But just that level of validation and I'm not going to say that I'm agreeing with them, is really, really powerful.
Yeah, I like that. So that's an easy task. But you're right. Even if I posted something and I see somebody liked it, I'm not even thinking twice about that. But when you see a comment, especially it's not even necessarily supportive. It's just, I'm here and I'm listening. And I think that's really, really neat. I want people to make sure they know that you've got so much to offer outside of what we just talked about. I met you digitally by just seeing all of your posts on LinkedIn. I'd recommend people connect with Matt Halloran on LinkedIn. You've got great tips, whether you're in podcasting, marketing, the financial world, or you just want to be a better communicator. I've gotten a lot of tips from what you've posted and what we've talked about on even just how to grow your own personal brand. So my action item for all of you is go find Matt on LinkedIn. It's an easy way to connect. I know proudmouth.com. You guys got some cool stuff there. We do have a lot of people also that are learning about podcasting. And I know you've got some cohorts and classes on how to do that better as well. So I'm going to throw that out there. And then I know we've referenced your book a lot, but I think it's great. So I'm going to throw that. We'll put that in the show notes. Again, it's Shut the F Up and Listen with the fun cover. It's also a great book if you present it in the right way. That leaders that are listening, it's a really neat book for your colleagues and for your team. I would say, if I was to buy this and give it to my entire team, I need to make sure they know that I'm taking the same advice myself. But anyway, there's a lot of good ways to connect. So I want to make sure people know of that. And I'm going to give you the space to kind of wrap us up. If there's anything else that you want our audience to know on how to connect with you, and most importantly, one last truth or one last takeaway, if people were, so distracted by our beards in the last 45 minutes, they lost focus. What's that one thing you want them to be able to practically feel after this call?
That you need to learn how to listen, not listen to respond. I mean, honestly, that if everybody listening to this and everybody in the world just tried that once a day, we could really make a huge difference in all of our relationships, personally and professionally. They can also go to, so proudmouth.com is if you want to know more about what we do professionally and how we help people stop being the best kept secret in their area, mostly experts. We work with experts specifically. Or you can go to matthalloran.com. That's actually where you can find out more about me as a speaker. I do speaking engagements. I do keynotes. I also do workshops on listening, which are generally anywhere from 3 to 4 hours. I can do them virtually or I can do them in person. This is my passion, dude. I just, everything in my life is just consistently come back to the times that I've been most successful, the times where I've been the happiest, the times where I've made the biggest level of progress towards my goals is when I learned how to shut the F up and listen.
I think it's great. I appreciate you. And those people that are listening that think you're excellent communicators, take a time out for a second. I will tell you that in my first conversation with Matt, I have a bunch of notes. Just in the first time we chatted on, okay, I got to do this better on LinkedIn. I got to post this way differently. I got to think this differently about the podcast. What's a call to action? And so you're so giving with the advice and the tips, and I appreciate that. You're making an impact. So thanks for joining us today, and thanks for all that you do.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to this episode of Truth Be Told Podcast.
To help more listeners find our show, please provide us a rating, give us a follow, and share this episode with your colleagues. For the latest news and to engage with our guests, follow Truth Be Told on your favorite social media apps. And don't forget, we are available on all major platforms, including Apple, Spotify, and watch a video of this episode on YouTube. On behalf of our guests and valued sponsors, thanks again for listening to this episode of Truth Be Told.